A trash bag, a $5 deed, a rusted padlock that hadn't been touched in 30 years. On the day Leo Vance turned 18, the state of New York handed him both his freedom and his eviction notice in the same manila envelope. What was waiting for him in the woods of the Catskills wasn't junk. It was a 30-year secret his grandfather had buried under a concrete floor, and it was about to make him the most dangerous landowner in 3 counties. Leo Vance grew up knowing the smell of sawdust before he knew the smell of his own mother's cooking. His grandfather, Thomas Vance, was a stonemason and carpenter who built things that lasted, stone walls that didn't shift, joints that didn't creak. He taught Leo to tie a proper knot at 6 years old. He taught him to read a compass at 7. Thomas was not a man who joked, and he was not a man who wasted anything, not lumber, not words, not money. Leo's parents died when he was 9, a year after Thomas did. 2 losses stacked so close together that Leo's childhood folded into a single gray season. He and his younger sister Maya went into the foster system together, then got split into different placements. Then, through a stroke of luck neither of them questioned too hard, landed at the same group home in upstate New York. Northwood. 6 years there. 6 years of shared meals at long tables, supervised phone calls, and rules that existed to keep feelings small and manageable. There was a routine to it. Lights out at 9. No physical contact during goodbyes. A casework system that measured success in paperwork, not outcomes. On Sunday afternoons, when the weather allowed it, the kids at Northwood were led into the side yard for an hour. Leo and Maya would sit on the one bench that didn't wobble, and he'd tell her things he half remembered about their grandfather, the cotton candy at the county fair, the smell of pipe tobacco, the way Thomas's hands were always rough but never hurt when he held yours. Maya was 12. She kept a photograph from that county fair folded inside a paperback book, the 4 of them squinting into the sun, Thomas just visible at the edge of the frame. It was the only physical proof she had that a different life once existed. Leo's 18th birthday was circled on the wall calendar in the staff office, not because anyone was celebrating it, but because it was a processing date. Aging out wasn't a milestone, it was a deadline. Mrs. Gable, his caseworker, had explained it to him months earlier in the same flat tone she used for fire drill instructions. On the day he turned 18, his file would close, his bed would be reassigned, and any remaining contact with Maya would be subject to a 30-day blackout period, standard procedure to ease the transition. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both understood what that meant. Leo would leave, Maya would stay. And in 6 years, she'd be standing on the same cracked steps with her own trash bag, alone. The morning it happened, the sky over Northwood was the color of dishwater, and the slush on the ground had long since forgotten what it felt like to be snow. Leo stood on the front steps, holding a black trash bag that contained everything he owned in the world. A few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, a worn paperback his mother used to read aloud, and that one framed photograph from the fair. Mrs. Gable handed him a manila envelope along with his final disbursement, $250. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said, the words landing with no more weight than a grocery list. She tapped the envelope. "This one's from the county probate office, something your grandfather left you." He hadn't heard his grandfather's name spoken by an adult in 9 years. Through the wire mesh window of the common room, Maya's face was pressed to the glass. She was small for 12, all elbows and worry. Her hand came up flat against the pane. Leo wanted to put his own hand against it from his side, but he was already outside, already on the other end of a door that had clicked shut behind him, not with a bang, but with the quiet, final sound of an account being closed. They weren't allowed a real goodbye, so they just looked at each other through a single pane of glass that, in that moment, felt like 100 miles of empty highway. $250 felt like enough money to starve slowly and not enough to actually live. Leo walked away from Northwood without looking back because he knew that if he turned around and saw Maya's face one more time, his legs would stop working entirely. At the bus station, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and old coffee, Leo finally opened the manila envelope. Inside was a letter from an attorney named Alistair Finch, in a Catskills town Leo couldn't pronounce. Stripped of its legal language, the letter said this: his grandfather had left him a piece of land. Lot 7B, 2.5 acres, unincorporated, undeveloped. To claim the deed, Leo needed to appear in person and settle the outstanding property taxes. The total owed $5. Attached was a grainy photocopied satellite image, a smudge of gray woods with one structure barely visible inside it. A long, curved shape, like a metal loaf of bread dropped in the trees. A Quonset hut. Old war surplus, the kind people sometimes repurposed as barns. This one looked abandoned, forgotten. A piece of junk on a worthless half-acre nobody wanted badly enough to even charge real taxes on. Leo's first instinct was to throw the letter away. He needed a job, a room, a plan that didn't involve chasing a dead man's riddle into the mountains. But on the platform next to his southbound bus, the one heading toward the city, toward shelters and the grind everyone had warned him about, another bus sat idling, its destination sign cycling through small Catskills town names. One of them matched the letterhead in his hand. It was the first real choice anyone had let him make in 6 years. He bought the ticket. 5 hours later, the bus dropped him in a town that looked like it had been quietly forgotten by the last 50 years. Brick storefronts, faded signage, a stillness that felt less like decay and more like patience. At a rest stop along the way, Leo had broken the 30-day rule and called Northwood's hallway payphone, the one Maya could reach without anyone noticing. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice small and tight. "I'm going somewhere," he told her. "Grandpa left me land, May, a real place. It's got a building on it and everything." "Does it have a roof?" "Pretty much all roof," he said, and the laugh that came out cracked in the middle. "I'm going to fix it up," he told her. "I'm going to make it a home, and then I'm going to come for you, I promise." It was an impossible promise from a kid with $200 and a deed to a worthless lot, and they both knew it. But she had to hear it, and he had to say it out loud to believe it himself. Mr. Finch's office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. He slid the deed across his mahogany desk, along with a stack of documents, and Leo signed where indicated, his signature coming out shaky and unfamiliar. Then Finch leaned back. "Let's talk about the reality of your situation. No road access, no well, no septic, no power. It is, for all intents and purposes, a piece of wilderness with a derelict military surplus hut sitting on it." "Why did he leave it to me?" "He never told me his specific intentions," Finch said. "Only that on your 18th birthday, the property was to be offered to you, and only you, for the cost of the back taxes. If you declined, the state would absorb it." He paused. "There is, however, another option. A developer, part of a larger LLC, has been buying up land in that area. They're prepared to offer $5,000 for the parcel, as is." $5,000, a security deposit, a lawyer's retainer, a real running start at fighting for Maya. It was the smart choice, the sane choice. "I'm not selling," Leo said, before he'd fully decided it. "I want to see it." Finch handed over a heavy, rust-covered iron key and a hand-drawn map. "Follow the county road 3 miles, turn onto Old Miller Road. Walk until the road disappears." The property was another half-mile hike from there. The walk took longer than expected, the light going thin and orange through bare branches, the cold deepening with every step. When Leo finally pushed through a tangle of brush and saw the Quonset hut for the first time in person, his stomach dropped. It was worse than the photograph. Rust bloomed across the curved metal in angry orange patches like a skin disease. The doors were dented, weeds and saplings had grown right up to its base, slowly reclaiming it for the forest. It didn't look sturdy. It looked defeated. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. The $5,000 offer echoed in his head. He could still turn back, find a phone, call Finch, take the money, disappear into a life that made sense. Instead, he worked the rusted key into the padlock. It resisted, screeched, then gave with a satisfying clunk. The chain dropped. He hauled one massive door open on groaning hinges and stepped into a cavern of shadows. Damp earth, rust, trapped time. A single beam of light cut through a crack in the roof, landing on a small wooden crate sitting alone in the center of the concrete floor. Placed there, deliberate. Inside, packed in straw, glass canning jars. Leo lifted one expecting preserves. It was too heavy. Inside were tightly rolled bundles of cash, bound in brittle rubber bands. He counted one bundle, $1,000. There were at least 20 bundles per jar, and a dozen jars in the crate. This wasn't a head start. This was a different life entirely. Maya's life, suddenly, possibly, within reach. He sat down hard on the cold concrete and cried, the sound echoing strangely off the curved metal walls, for the system, for the cold, for his parents, for a quiet, practical man who'd built a secret lifeboat in the middle of the woods. Beneath the last layer of straw in the crate was a leather journal with his grandfather's name stamped in faded gold leaf. Inside the cover, a letter addressed directly to him. Leo, if you are reading this, it means you turned 18. It means you didn't take the easy money. I knew you wouldn't. Thomas explained the money was for Leo and Maya both. Everything he'd saved after selling the family house, living cheap for years to build them a foundation the world couldn't take away. But then came the line that changed the shape of everything. But the money is the least important thing I'm leaving you. The most important thing is this land, this hut. Don't let them bully you, son. They will try. They will offer you money that sounds like a kingdom. But what you have here is more valuable than their resort. You just have to find it. The final line was underlined twice. The foundation is the key. Everything starts with the foundation. Leo looked down at the cracked concrete floor beneath him, the same floor he was sitting on, and felt, for the first time, that the hut was not finished revealing itself. He spent that first night on a pile of musty canvas tarps, the cold seeping up through concrete and down through corrugated metal, every gust outside sounding like something trying to peel the roof away. It was a different kind of fear than he'd known in the system, elemental, honest, almost clean. By morning, survival took over. He hiked into town, bought an axe, a tarp, a sleeping bag, a propane stove, from a hardware store owner named George who asked no questions and threw in a discount as a welcome to the neighborhood. Weeks of brutal, purposeful labor followed, patching the roof, hauling water from a creek a quarter-mile out, learning to split wood until his hands calloused over. He found an old wood stove in the back of the hut, cleaned it for 2 days straight, ran new pipe, and the first night he lit it, the warmth that filled that vast metal space felt like a miracle. He called Maya every few days. He told her about the stove, the woods, the work. He didn't tell her about the money. It felt too big, too dangerous to say over a hallway payphone. You sound different, she told him once. Older, he said. Less scared. I am scared, but it's a good scared now. A month after Leo arrived, a letter reached Finch's office on thick cream paper, embossed with a stylized mountain peak. Summit Creek Estates. Their new offer, $25,000, and a threat dressed as a courtesy. If Leo refused, they'd petition the county to seize the land under eminent domain, citing the unimproved structure as a blight. The old Leo, the one on the Northwood steps with a trash bag, would have folded immediately. This Leo, calloused hands and a working stove behind him, did not. What did my grandfather mean? He asked Finch. When he wrote that the foundation was the key? Finch's expression sharpened. Thomas was a master stonemason before he was anything else. He worked the old dam projects in this state. He knew geology. If he said the foundation mattered, he meant it literally. Back at the hut, Leo spent an entire day on his hands and knees, sweeping the concrete floor clean, running his palms across every inch of it. In the back corner, half hidden behind the wood stove, he found it. Not a crack, but a seam. A deliberate, perfectly straight line forming a square roughly 4 feet across. There were no handles, no rings. After an hour of searching, he realized it was counterweighted. Pressure on one edge was enough. He wedged a length of timber under the lip and threw his weight against it. With a low, grinding groan, the slab tilted upward, revealing a black square hole and a rebar ladder descending into the dark. The air rising from below smelled of cold stone and deep earth. The hidden cellar was small, dry, and built from expertly fitted fieldstone, his grandfather's hands, unmistakably. In the center, on a stone pedestal, sat a metal lockbox beside a second letter sealed inside a glass jar to protect it from moisture. Leo unfolded the page with shaking hands. Leo, if you found this, you were paying attention. Good man. I built this hut for a reason, not just to hide the money, not just to give you a roof. I built it on this exact spot for what's under it. Thomas had worked a state geological survey crew as a young man, mapping the entire region. Most of the ridge was worthless shale and granite, but a vein of something else ran beneath it, a deep aquifer. Some of the purest spring water in the state. Its survey buried and classified decades ago to prevent a land rush. Because the water had never been documented when the parcel was sold, the water rights had never been separated from the deed. You don't just own 2.5 acres of land, son. You own the water underneath it. All of it. Leo sat on the cold stone floor, the truth rearranging everything he understood about the last month. Summit Creek Estates wasn't building a golf resort without a private water source. They couldn't. They hadn't wanted his worthless parcel at all. They'd wanted what was buried beneath it, and they'd tried to take it from an orphaned 18-year-old for $25,000. The lockbox held the proof, original survey documents, water tables, and a legal opinion Thomas had commissioned years earlier, confirming that whoever held the deed to Lot 7B controlled the aquifer. He'd been quietly building this fortress for 30 years. Finch read through it all at his desk, took off his glasses, and laughed under his breath. "Thomas, you magnificent bastard." Then, looking up at Leo, "This isn't a defensive fight anymore. This is leverage." What followed was a quiet war fought in registered letters and legal filings rather than threats. Finch hired a water rights attorney from Albany. Summit Creek tried to challenge the validity of the decades-old survey, and failed, because Thomas Vance's work had always been meticulous. Their entire strategy had depended on nobody knowing what was underground. Once Leo could prove he knew, it collapsed. Through it all, Leo kept building. A generator brought power for tools and light. He framed a bedroom for himself, a larger one for Maya, a kitchen, sanded salvaged barnwood into smooth flooring. The town noticed. A retired electrician taught him to ground his wiring properly. A neighbor dropped off a box of pots and pans. George let him use the hardware store's workshop for cabinetry. They weren't just being kind. They were choosing a side. When Summit Creek's lawyers finally called a meeting, their final offer was $250,000, plus a promise to drop the eminent domain petition. Leo said no. Instead, he and Finch presented a counter-proposal, a utility easement through a corner of the property in exchange for a yearly fee, a fully funded commercial well installed on Leo's land and owned by Leo, a free grid connection, and a community water trust guaranteeing the town reduced-rate access, permanently. The lawyers left without an answer. Everyone in the room already knew who'd won. A month later, the contracts were signed. The day the power company finally connected the line, Leo flipped the switch by the door, and the entire Quonset hut filled with steady, clean light for the first time in 30 years. That summer, Leo went back to court, this time for Maya. Finch came. George came. Half the town showed up with letters of support. The judge looked at the file, the photographs of the home Leo had built, and at Maya sitting small and brave in her best dress, and granted the guardianship petition. Walking out of that courthouse holding her hand was the only victory that ever really mattered. When Maya saw the hut for the first time, new windows, a real door, a porch, smoke curling from the chimney, she went quiet, then turned to Leo with a fierce certainty in her grip. "It's not a house," he told her, almost laughing. "It's a Quonset hut." "No," she said. "It's a home." The money still sits mostly untouched in a trust for her future, but the real inheritance was never the cash in those jars. It was a foundation, literal and otherwise, built by a quiet, stubborn man who knew that the greatest act of love is sometimes leaving someone a puzzle you trust them to be strong enough to solve. Your foundation doesn't have to start with a $5 deed or a buried cellar. It can start with a trash bag and a promise kept to someone who's counting on you. If you've ever had to build something out of almost nothing, tell us about it in the comments. We read everyone, and your story might be the next one we tell.